Food that shouldn't exist is spreading through China's markets. Eggs that were never laid, cooking oil made from sewer waste, milk powder laced with industrial chemicals. At first, these sounded like isolated scandals, a few corrupt factories, a few criminals that were cutting corners. But over time, a far more disturbing reality began to emerge. China isn't just dealing with a few fake food incidents. It's dealing with an entire underground industry dedicated to manufacturing food that was never meant to be eaten. And the consequences are showing up in places that you never expect. Hospital wards, infant clinics, national health data, and a growing loss of trust that's cracking Chinese society at its foundation. This is not a fringe problem. This is not a rumor. This is what investigators, journalists, and health authorities have documented across decades. And once you understand the scale of it, you'll never look at a food import label the same way again. Let's break down exactly how this happened. Now, China is the largest food-producing nation on Earth. It feeds more than 1.4 billion people across an agricultural system so vast that no comparable structure exists anywhere in the world. But feeding that many people at that speed created something no one fully planned for. It created a shadow economy. Not a small one either. Not a few back alley vendors cutting corners, but a massive, sophisticated, and deeply entrenched underground industry built around one simple idea. You don't need to grow food, raise animals, or press oil from crops. You just need to make something that looks like food. And the people who figured this out have been operating for decades. The technical term for it in China is technology and hardcore work. It refers to the use of modern industrial chemistry to transform worthless or toxic raw materials into products that might look, smell, or even taste like real food. A phrase that went viral on Chinese social media because millions of people recognized it because they lived it. We're not talking about food that's slightly substandard. We're talking about chicken feet soaked in formaldehyde, a chemical primarily used in morgues, and hydrogen peroxide to give them a bleached and shiny appearance. Meatballs laced with borax, an industrial cleaning agent, to achieve that bouncy premium texture. Star anise smoked with sulfur to cut drying time while making the spice so toxic that it leaches poison into a slow-cooked broth. These aren't one-off incidents. They're industrial techniques, taught, replicated, and scaled. And the question worth asking, the one investigators kept asking, was how an entire nation's food system got corrupted this deeply. The answer starts in 1978. When Deng Xiaoping launched China's economic reforms, he unleashed one of the fastest industrial expansions in all of human history. The agricultural sector exploded. Yields rose by more than 7% annually in the 5 years after reform. Private businesses flooded into food production. Factories, farms, suppliers, and distributors multiplied at extraordinary speed. Within a generation, food had become China's third largest industrial sector. But here's where the problem started. The food system grew too big, too fast for effective safety oversight. Millions of small producers entered the market with minimal inspection. Regulatory agencies were perpetually chasing a market that had already outpaced them. And crucially, the best food was exported, subjected to strict international standards, while domestic consumers were left to navigate a system where cutting corners was often the only way to survive in a brutally competitive market. And the competition was ruthless. In a market with millions of suppliers all undercutting each other on price, the producer who refused to cheat was the producer who went out of business. It wasn't just greed driving the fraud either. It was survival economics in a system that had never built the guardrails to stop it. The line between food and chemicals started to blur, and once it blurred, it kept going. And nowhere was that more visible than what became known as gutter oil. In Chinese, it's called di gu yu, literally gutter oil. Here's what that means. Workers in major Chinese cities go out before dawn with buckets and containers, and they collect grease from restaurant drains, sewer traps, and slaughterhouse waste. They bring it back to processing workshops, they filter it, boil it, bleach it, deodorize it, and pour it into clean containers. Then, they sell it back into the food supply as cooking oil, at a price that legitimate suppliers simply can't match. By 2010, researchers estimated that gutter oil represented roughly 10% of China's edible oil market, with approximately 3 million tons consumed annually. That means roughly 1 in every 10 meals eaten in China could have been cooked with oil collected from a sewer. This wasn't small scale. In Shandong province alone, One criminal network sold approximately 12,000 tons of waste oil over just 5 years, earning close to 100 million yuan. The oil reached not just street food stalls, but workplace cafeteria and school canteens. The health profile was terrifying. Gutter oil contains aflatoxins, potent carcinogens, benzopyrene, heavy metals. Long-term consumption is linked to liver disease, stomach cancer, and cardiovascular damage. China eventually even imposed the death penalty for the most severe cases, and the gutter oil industry kept continuing anyway. But cooking oil, as grotesque as this is, wasn't the crisis that shook China to its core. That came in 2008, and it came for the most defenseless people in the country. In the summer of 2008, just before China was due to host the Olympic Games, the moment Beijing had planned for years to show the world a rising superpower, hospitals across the country began reporting something alarming. Infants were coming in with kidney stones. Kidney stones are extraordinarily rare in babies, and within weeks, reports were coming in from multiple provinces, and the numbers were growing. The source was traced to infant formula. Manufacturers had been adding melamine, which is an industrial chemical used in the production of plastics and fertilizers, to watered down milk. The reason was sickeningly simple. Standard quality control tests measure protein content by detecting nitrogen levels. Melamine is high in nitrogen, and by adding it to diluted milk, producers can make thin, cheap milk pass every quality test on paper. The product looked nutritious, but in reality, it was building crystals inside infant kidneys. Nearly 300,000 babies were affected. 54,000 required hospitalization, and 6 died. Parents across China rushed to test their children. Hospitals were overwhelmed. The government was forced to pull the story out of a news blackout it had imposed to protect the Olympics. When the truth finally did come out, the public reaction wasn't just outrage, it was something deeper and harder to reverse. It was the moment millions of Chinese parents decided they could no longer trust the food their country produced. Shelves of imported formula cleared out overnight. Parents began traveling to Hong Kong, to Australia, to anywhere with a foreign dairy aisle. More than 100 foreign formula brands flooded into China in the years that followed because domestic brands had not just lost market share, they lost the trust that some have never recovered. And if you think the melamine scandal was the end of it, well, you haven't heard the worst part yet. Because while the government prosecuted the dairy executives, they sent 2 men to death and promised sweeping reforms, the underground food industry was evolving. Not shrinking, but evolving. If the gutter oil scandal represented how criminals could corrupt a natural product, the next chapter showed something even more unsettling. They'd moved beyond corrupting food. They'd learned to manufacture it from scratch. The fake egg is perhaps the most extraordinary example of industrial food fraud in modern history. A fake egg costs far less than the real egg, which is why criminal networks began manufacturing chemical replicas that were visually indistinguishable from the genuine article. The shell, the white, the yolk, everything. The process is a masterclass in applied chemistry. The egg white is created by dissolving sodium alginate in water, adjusting viscosity until it mimics real albumin. The yolk is formed from a different mix of resin, tinted with pigments, poured into a spherical mold, and then submerged in a calcium chloride bath, which triggers a reaction that creates a thin, elastic membrane, replicating the membrane of a real yolk. The shell is then cast from a mixture of paraffin wax, gypsum powder, and calcium carbonate. The whole process takes just under 5 minutes. These eggs offer zero nutritional value. They introduce alum, which is linked to neurological damage and Alzheimer's disease. The preservatives used can harm brain and nerve cells. And the fact that training courses for producing artificial eggs are openly promoted online tells you everything you need to know about the commercial scale of this operation. Meat fraud ran parallel to all of this. In 2013, a major criminal operation was exposed involving 63 individuals who had been using gelatin, red pigments, and nitrates to disguise rat meat, fox meat, and mink from fur farms, and selling it as lamb. Street vendors and restaurants across multiple provinces were serving these so-called lamb skewers, but the health risks were serious. Rat meat can carry salmonella. The fur farm animals had been treated with hormones and were never subjected to food-grade veterinary inspection. In Shaanxi province, authorities seized 20,000 kilograms of pork that had been soaked in paraffin wax and industrial salts to mimic the grain and texture of beef. a particular violation for China's roughly 20 million Muslim citizens, from whom consuming pork is a religious prohibition. Hey, this is Fall of Nations, and if this is showing you just how deep the crisis goes, subscribe. Because what happened when investigators started looking beyond China's borders is where the story gets truly global. The fake food problem didn't stay in China. China is the world's largest exporter of honey. And in the early 2000s, investigators in the United States began noticing something strange in the honey supply. The pollen was gone. Pollen is the only reliable way to trace where honey originated geographically. And when honey is ultra-filtered, heated and forced through microscopic filters, all the pollen gets removed. The product looks perfectly normal, and it tests clean, but it can no longer be traced to any source. An investigation found that 100% of honey samples from major American fast food chains and 76% from mainstream grocery stores had been completely stripped of pollen. The honey had been routed through Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, and other countries to disguise its Chinese origin and evade anti-dumping duties that reached as high as 221%. Some of the honey was laced with chloramphenicol, which is an antibiotic not approved for food use by the FDA. The investigation that followed became one of the largest food fraud cases in American history. Federal charges named 14 individuals, including executives of a German food conglomerate, for evading approximately $80 million in anti-dumping duties. A second phase targeted American processors who had knowingly bought and sold the smuggled product, bringing total shipping duties evaded to more than $180 million. Project Honeygate. But honey's not the only Chinese export with a disturbing backstory. China produces approximately 73% of the world's garlic. It dominates the American market. But investigations and reports have surfaced alleging that garlic intended for export is fertilized with human feces and raw sewage, a practice that poses real risks of bacterial and parasitic contamination. After growing in those conditions, the garlic is reportedly bleached with industrial chemicals to appear white and clean before it reaches export markets. In 2023, United States senators introduced what became known as the Sewage Garlic Imports Act, calling for a national security investigation into Chinese garlic imports. Under the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, goods produced in Xinjiang, a region where forced labor had been extensively documented, are presumed to have been made through coercion unless proven otherwise. The garlic industry is implicated in both. Now, by the time a clove of garlic reaches a kitchen counter in America, its journey through potentially contaminated fields and coerced labor is completely invisible. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's just how global supply chains work. But the deepest damage from China's fake food crisis isn't physical. It's not the carcinogens in the oil or the toxins in the eggs or the antibiotics in the honey. It's what happens to a society when food, the most basic thing a person needs, becomes something you can no longer trust. There is a phrase in Chinese that captures this social collapse with brutal precision: mutual consumption of filth. It describes a society where the moral contract between producers and consumers has broken down so thoroughly that everyone is participating in the same poison cycle, knowingly selling harmful products because they know that the people next to them are doing the same thing, and there's no system strong enough to stop it. This isn't just cynicism, it's documented. Surveys of Chinese consumers show that a significant majority express ongoing concern about the safety of domestic food. Some families only buy imported products when they can afford it. Online communities share guides for detecting fake eggs, adulterated rice, and gutter oil. The fact that millions of people need to be taught how to identify whether their eggs are chemically manufactured tells you something profound about the state of institutional trust in China. And trust, once broken at this scale, doesn't come back easily. After the melamine scandal, China's domestic baby formula market collapsed so completely that over 100 foreign brands entered the Chinese market within a few years, capturing the majority of sales in major cities. Parents were buying formula from pharmacies in Hong Kong, from relatives abroad, from strangers on the internet, any source that wasn't domestic, because the alternative was risking their child's kidneys on the off chance that this time, this brand, this batch, was clean. When a parent can no longer trust their own country's food supply, something fundamental has been broken. The government has responded with high-profile crackdowns. The annual 3.15 Consumer Rights Gala, broadcast nationally since 1991, exposes food fraud cases every year. In 2025, it targeted seafood producers using phosphate agents to artificially inflate the weight of shrimp, and uncovered restaurants that were reselling customers' leftovers. Thousands of factories have been shut down. But the underlying problem remains stubbornly alive. China's food industry is characterized by millions of small and medium producers operating in ferociously competitive conditions, where the margin between profit and loss often comes down to just whether you're willing to substitute the real thing for a chemical imitation. Regulatory agencies run the same whack-a-mole operation year after year. You shut down one network and another appears somewhere else. Bloggers who gain audiences by exposing dark technology in food get their accounts canceled by pressure from powerful commercial interests. Now, when the people trying to inform the public get silenced, and the regulatory response is a televised spectacle rather than structural reform, that cycle is going to continue. And here's the thing that makes this more than a story about China. But before we get there, there's one more layer to this that most people miss entirely. Because not all of the danger in China's food supply comes from deliberate fraud. Some of it comes from something far harder to legislate against: ignorance and negligence around foods that are genuinely toxic when mishandled. In 2024, a family in Guangxi was rushed to intensive care after eating black fungus, a common ingredient in Asian cooking that had been soaked for 2 days instead of the recommended few hours. Extended soaking allowed the fungus to produce bongkrecic acid, which is a deadly toxin with no known antidote. China's CDC recorded multiple mushroom poisoning outbreaks in 2023 and 2024 across 97 documented poisonous species. These aren't exotic dangers, they're everyday ingredients, mishandled in a food culture that's been shaped by decades of inconsistent safety education. The fake food crisis and the natural food poisoning crisis are different problems, but they share the same root: a food system where the infrastructure of trust, inspections, standards, the enforcement, the education, has never quite kept pace with the scale of what it's supposed to protect. Food moves. Ingredients are produced in one country, processed in another, packaged in a third, and shipped to a supermarket shelf thousands of miles away with a label that tells you almost nothing about where any component actually came from. The melamine that poisoned infants in 2008 wasn't just a Chinese story. It triggered product recalls across Asia, Europe, and beyond, as Chinese dairy was found in international food products from multiple major brands. Honeygate wasn't Chinese customs inspectors failing, it was an operation embedded in American warehouses and processing facilities. The sewage garlic controversy isn't hypothetical. American senators pushed emergency legislation because they believed the product was already on American shelves. Food fraud is not a developing world problem. It's a global supply chain problem, and it thrives wherever oversight is weak, margins are thin, and complexity creates shadows. Which brings us to the original question. We started with food that shouldn't even exist. Eggs built from chemicals, oil pressed from sewage, milk designed to poison the people it was supposed to feed. And what we found underneath those individual scandals was something much harder to fix than a few criminal factories. We found a system, a set of incentives, a collapse of trust between producers and consumers so total that it created an entire parallel economy built on manufacturing the appearance of food without any of its substance. China has made genuine efforts to reform. Laws have been strengthened, agencies created, sentences have been handed down, and there's real progress in parts of the system. But the question that lingers, the one worth leaving with, is whether a society that has lived through this level of food fraud can ever fully rebuild the trust it lost. Can you legislate your way back from a culture of mutual consumption of filth? Can the 3.15 Consumer Rights Gala televise enough scandals to compensate for the ones that never get caught? Can crackdowns and death sentences fix a system where the incentive to cheat is baked into the economics of the market itself? Or is the damage too deep, too systemic, too woven into the fabric of an economy built on speed and scale over safety and truth? Let us know exactly what you think in the comments below, and if you want more of this, the kind of analysis that follows a crisis all the way down to the roots, subscribe to Fall of Nations, because this story is far from over.